Sorry, I was drinking my coffee. Whoops. Do you remember the feather bookmarks that we got from the library? Still using it. Although my little end is getting a little, see it? It's hanging on though. Okay, so Peter, we think, had just found Frederick. I'm going to move my thing over here because every time I look, you guys will think I'm looking to the side. There we go. Right. Let's see. It ended with, oh yeah. Okay. So there's 3 different storylines. Peg is trying to unlock all the kids, right? Peter has changed into a sea serpent and has gone to find Frederick the dogfish. And Sir Toad and Simon have gone to the Just Deserts. And at the very end, Simon had dropped coal on all the bags in the pit, and 1,000 or more ravens were flew away free, and we're assuming all the bad guys, all the thieves, were burning in the fire. So that's how it left us. Okay. One more drink. So we know we found Frederick. We know they got the ravens. Peg's the only story that we haven't gotten to see how she's done. So chapter 28, Peg's breakthrough. How long is it? I think it's kind of long because I didn't want to put it with another one. It's not too terribly long. How long is 29? $3.54, that's 10 pages. 34. Well, they're both just 10 pages. We'll see. We'll see how long it takes me to do 28. Once she had been able to recruit her friends, the chapter title is Peg's Breakthrough. Once she had been able to recruit her friends, Princess Peg found that the lock greasing operation went surprisingly well. Word spread from one slave to another, and in a matter of minutes, every child there knew that the princess had come to rescue them and needed their help. The goblet of sluglard moved quickly among them. Each child applied the glob to the keyhole of their shackles while taking care never to stop marching so the apes wouldn't get suspicious. Just before daybreak, the goblet came back to Peg, empty as a yawn. Every lock had been greased up good and proper and was now ready for the raven's arrival. I hope Sir Toad and Simon get here soon, she thought as she watched the clockwork beast chew away at the cavern wall. Huge, salty streams of water were now gushing out from both sides of the rumbling drill, drenching the slaves below. The water level was steadily rising, allowing the sea serpents access to the whole cavern. Were it not for the iron leashes holding them fast, they probably would have gobbled up half the slaves by now. To avoid getting wet themselves, the apes had relocated to the raised stairway in back of the cavern. They passed the hours with a game in which they took turns pretending to momentarily lose hold of one of the monster's leashes. Each time, the loose sea serpent would instantly bolt for the children, only to be jerked backward at the very last moment. "Don't you tots worry," the apes would howl, jingling their chains. "You'll all get a chance to pet these beasties soon enough." Peg couldn't help but worry about what was taking Peter so long. What if Scrape had been right? What if her brother, the long-lost prince, had been gobbled up by sea serpents? She felt the precious box of fantastic eyes knock against her side with each step. She would have traded them in a second to see her brother's face once more. By now the children were suffering from severe exhaustion. A few of them had even passed out and were rolling along the bottom of the cages, tripping up their fellow slaves. "What are you doing?" one of the apes snarled when he noticed the disruption. "None of you sleeps till you finish digging." He let his servant take a good few nips at the cages. The children pulled their sleeping neighbors to their feet and continued marching. "Don't you worry," the guard said with mock concern. "When the drill breaks through, you can sleep as much as you want." This joke sent the other apes into fits of snorting laughter. Not very funny. "Listen up," one of the guards roared. "This here's your official slave master speaking." The voice belonged to the ape named Maul. He had recently been put in charge of the mines, and he was enjoying his new position immensely. "From now on, all you maggots, keep looking straight at the wall ahead of you. First one of you who turns round will be fish food. Got it?" Peg and the others did as they were told. They marched forward, eyes fixed on the rumbling drill. "Yeah, just like that," Maul said. "Keep it up." Peg noticed that his voice had grown distant and slightly metallic. "Keep them heads forward," another voice snickered, also metallic. "Nothing to see back here." Several of the others chuckled with him. Peg listened to the tinny laughter echoing behind her. Tinny meaning it had like a tin, a metal sound. The sound reminded her of the brass horn the king had used to summon Longclaw. Deciding to take a chance, she disobeyed Maul's orders and glanced toward the back tunnel. Sure enough, the apes were gone. They had tethered the 12 sea serpents to a stalagmite near the base of the stairs. But why would they leave? She muttered to herself. As she turned to resume her pace, a spurt of water burst from the wall and struck her in the face. She sputtered, glaring up at the clockwork drill. And in that moment, she finally understood what was happening. Peg realized that this magic beast was like a giant shovel, and the wall of the cavern was not endless rock, but a thin layer. On the other side was the ocean that Sir Toad had shown her on the map, and when the ocean broke through, each and every one of them would be drowned in the flood. "It's a trap!" she screamed. "Everyone stop!" But the noise of the digging machine was so great that none of the slaves could hear her. She would have to make them listen. Peg jumped out of her wheel and into the murky water. The sea serpent sensed her immediately and strained violently against her leashes. The girl kept a safe distance between herself and the monsters as she swam to a spot of dry rock. This had at one time been the island of rock where the children slept. Now only the middle remained. Bolted to the center was an enormous iron ring, and from that ring ran a single chain that snaked across the cavern and through the shackles of every single slave. Peg took the chain in both hands and braced her feet against the floor. There are some times when a person is in such dire straits that they are able to achieve the impossible, less by their own strength than by a strength that moves through them. For example, consider the old story of the long-haired judge who toppled a palace with his bare hands. For Peg, gripping the rusted chain in her thin fingers, this was just such a moment. With a mighty cry, she heaved against the chain, yanking it with all her might. Because it was attached to their ankles, when the chain moved, the children moved with it. The boy nearest to Peg was whipped right off his feet. He fell, knocking over the girl next to him, and so on, in sort of a chain reaction. Dun-dun-dun. Soon there were hundreds upon hundreds of children sputtering and bickering in the knee-deep water, trying to figure out who had just tripped them. The wheels of the digging machine stopped moving not a moment too soon. Peg could almost hear the ocean straining against the cavern wall. She dropped the chain and cupped her hands around her mouth. "Attention, subjects! I need you all to listen very carefully." This time the children heard her and rose to their feet, awaiting instructions. "Right now we are all in grave danger," she called out. "On the other side of this wall is something that could kill us all at any moment." As it happened, Peg had much to learn about speech-making. Her words, while accurate, were indelicate at best. No sooner had she uttered, "something that could kill us all," than hundreds of children were seized with panic. Without even knowing what they were doing, they started running frantically away from the horrible something, and that was hiding just behind the rock. The drill jolted back to life, this time rotating in the opposite direction. Water gushed out of the drill, slowly extracted itself from the wall. Peg knew that the drill was acting as a giant cork, and if it became dislodged, they would be sunk. "Stop running! You're making it worse!" she shouted, but it was no use. The children simply wouldn't listen. "Children!" A woman's voice boomed over the confusion. All of the slaves instantly stopped. They looked up to see Lillian standing atop a horizontal gear, drenched and furious. She waited, hands on her hips, until she had the full attention of every slave in the cavern. "The princess was in the middle of saying something when you so rudely interrupted." She said "you" in such a way that made every child bow their head in shame. "We apologize, Your Majesty." "Please continue." "We apologize, Your Majesty," the children murmured. "Please continue." Peg cleared her throat. "As you know, I'm working on a plan to get us all out of here, but you all have to do exactly as I say. An army of ravens will be coming soon to break open all of your locks. That's what the slug lard was for. When they arrive, you must not be afraid. Simply stick your shackled legs out of the water and they will free you." "What about the snake monsters?" a girl named Bragg called out. "They'll gobble us up if we try to escape." "No, they won't, dummy," Another voice said. Peter Nimble, the true prince, has a plan to stop them. Peg looked through the crowd to see who had spoken up for her brother. It was Scrape. He's right, she said, her cheeks flushing. For now, we just have to stay calm. I promise help is on the... Hoy! A voice snarled behind her. What's all this, then? It was Maul, who had come to see why the machine had stopped turning. He cracked his whip, and a dozen more apes appeared beside him. I warned you, maggots, what'd happen if you quit working. Despite being all the way on the other side of the cavern, the children were still frightened as they crowded backward, each step turning their cages in the drill a bit more. Don't move, Peg said. Stand your ground. You must be brave. Maul saw her and grinned. Well, if it ain't the princess. As you may know, apes are great branch swingers, used to covering tremendous distances without ever setting foot on the ground. A skill Maul demonstrated as he sprung from the top of the stairs, grabbed hold of one stalactite, then another, and dropped with a crash to Peg's side. Before the girl could react, he had snatched her by the neck. King will have me promoted for sure if I bring him your filthy hide. He licked his dripping tusk, grinning at the thought of delivering her still warm head to Incarnadine. Come to think of it, if I bring you dead, he'll thank me even more. Peg struggled to pry his claws from her windpipe, but he only squeezed tighter, crushing the life from her. She felt a thunderous pounding in her skull, and it seemed as if the torches were all being snuffed out one by one. Shadows swirled and darted around her. She was losing consciousness. The princess dropped her head, and everything went black. It's not the end of the chapter, though. So, Peg can't die. They can't kill off one of the main characters, right? So who do you think it's going to be? Who's going to save her? Who's going to show up? Is it going to be Peter first? Dogfish? It's going to be Simon? Toad? Sir Toad? Ready? The next thing Peg knew, she was up to her neck in salty water, gasping for breath. Pandemonium swirled around her. Apes were splashing and shouting, swatting at the air. Tiny black clouds were swooping high and low. Maul was staggering blindly through the darkness, clutching his face. Peg shook her throbbing head, trying to follow what was happening. Those shadows, they somehow looked familiar. Suddenly, she realized what they were. Simon! She shouted, scrambling to her feet. Children first! The raven commanded his brothers. Titus, keep the apes away from the machine! Birds swarmed around the drill, diving into the cages. The slaves were ready and waiting with their shackled feet high in the air. The locks had been well oiled, and the birds' beaks popped them open with little trouble. Bravo, Captain! Another voice cried. Peg looked up to see Sir Toad, perched atop the drill, cheering the troops on. Now let's show those apes what we're made of! Agreed, friend! Simon circled around to rally his flock. Brothers, attack! Ravens swept through the air, talons flashing. The primates were ridiculously outnumbered. Within seconds, the royal guard was driving them above ground. Grunts, retreat! Maul commanded, lumbering for the tunnels. The apes barreled up the steps behind him, snapping their whips and clutching their bleeding humps. When the last one disappeared, the birds let out a raucous cry of victory. The children cheered with them, throwing their open shackles into the air. This joyous revelry, however, was soon replaced with another mood, one of mortal terror. At first, no one noticed that Maul had unleashed the sea serpents before escaping, but when the first shrieking monster leapt from the water, complete mayhem broke loose. The vicious creatures were finally free, and they were hungry. They still had on their iron masks, which prevented them from seeing exactly where the children were, but they could smell fresh meat close by. The children scrambled up the side of the digging machine, trying desperately to keep clear of the 12 sets of glassy toothed jaws. The creatures thrashed through the water, swatting birds out of their way with their tails as they lunged for the children's bare feet. Peg and her subjects scrambled atop the tallest gears of the machine, safe from the snapping jaws. Hold tight, she commanded. So long as we're up here, the serpents can't reach us. One of the monsters jerked its head back, sniffing the air. It turned to the other serpents and shrieked in some devilish tongue. All at once, the 12 creatures clamped their mighty jaws around whatever clockwork they could reach and flailed wildly. Metal groaned as pistons were ripped from the machinery. 1 or 2 smaller children slipped through their perches, nearly falling into the water. The princess clung to her trembling cog. "They'll tear the machine right out of the wall," she called to Simon. The ravens attacked again, but their talons were useless against the scaly hides. Peg watched in horror as the serpent snatched up whole mouthfuls of ravens and spit them into the water. As she desperately tried to conceive of a plan, out of nowhere, a new serpent burst from the water, knocking the others aside. The 12 monsters shrieked with fury and went after this new aggressor. They smashed through stalagmites and boulders trying to get him. Peg watched, confused, as the thin creature wiggled this way and that, drawing his attackers away from the children. Could one of the creatures actually be protecting them? In the dim light, she caught a glimpse of what she thought was a pair of shiny black eyes. "Peter?" she whispered. A deep voice shook the cavern. "Slow down, mate! Don't poach all the fun!" With that, an even bigger fish, one with floppy ears and a wagging tail, broke to the surface. "Leave some for good old Frederick!" Children and ravens alike watched in awe as the enormous dogfish swished into action. The serpents flailed and snapped and spit as Frederick took their leashes in his mouth and throttled them against the walls. His teeth were not sharp, but his strength was immense, and the slithery creatures found themselves completely powerless against the broad side of his tail. "Heads up, mate!" He snagged one of the wiggling serpents in his jaw and flung it clean across the cavern. The shrieking monster smashed into what was left of the digging machine, shattering it into 100 pieces. A deep rumbling shook the mines. "The ocean's coming!" Peg screamed. "Everybody hold your breath!" This was all she could manage before the drill fell away from the wall and water exploded into the cavern, sweeping up every child, bird, and fish in its wake. That's the end of the chapter. How about I read half of the next chapter because then we can finish the book by the end of the week. Right, today's Wednesday. Oh, but this will be Thursdays. Read aloud, right? Today's Wednesday. I'm reading it for Thursday. Okay, hold on. Thursday, and then that would be Friday. How many pages is that? Because goodness knows Ellie will strangle me if I leave her hanging too much. Okay, so that's what I'll do. And I'll try. It's going to be a long read aloud tomorrow for Friday. But that's what I'm going to try to do. So let's see if I can read a little bit more. I'm watching my time. YouTube only likes my videos to be so long, and then it starts giving me trouble. Chapter 29, The Great Flood. In a matter of minutes, every fountain, faucet, and bath in the kingdom was overflowing with salt water. Smaller fish from the sea were floating into homes and hallways, flopping about the stone floors, madly gasping for breath. Water flooded down every stairwell and gushed like a mighty waterfall over every palace wall, filling the great chasm and sweeping over the just deserts. The desert kingdom had been transformed back into an island surrounded by glittering blue oceans. Incarnadine watched the transformation from the comfort of his dressing room balcony. He smiled with great relish. At last he had put an end to the sniveling little brother's enchantment. His fleet of battleships, which only moments before had been suspended over an empty chasm, was now floating on the water, ready for war. A few hours earlier, he had spotted his airship touching down in the deserts. Any minute now, the vessel would return with a legion of thankful thieves, and his army would be complete. He wound the key in his armor, and the gears lining his body tightened, ready to spring. Beneath his breastplate was a cunning science that had felled a kingdom, the first of many. "Soon every corner of the map will learn to fear my name," he said, gazing out at the water. 2 doors burst open on either side of him. "Your Highness!" Longclaw said, running in from the east. "Your Highness!" Maul said, running in from the west. Incarnadine swung around, glaring at them both. He had a rule about being interrupted before breakfast. "Out with it!" he snapped. Longclaw was the first to speak. "Sire, the airship, which I sent off without a hitch, failed to return this morning. I fear the thieves may have drowned in the great flood you so brilliantly wrought." The ape had spent much of the night debating whether it was wise to inform his ruler of what had really happened to the vessel, and decided it wasn't. Remember, Longclaw knew that Simon and Sir Toad had commandeered it. Remember, he was there when it was being loaded and saw it happen. So he's lying, trying to save his own tail. "Spilled milk, Longclaw." The king waved his hand. "The flood was brilliant, though, wasn't it?" He turned them all. "And you?" "The ravens are attacking," the second ape said. "They freed the slaves from the mines and making their way up ground as we speak. But please forgive me, master." He gave a feeble smile, hoping the king might extend to him the same grace he had shown Longclaw. "Forgive you? Of course I forgive you." Incarnadine raised his gauntlet as if to let the ape kiss it. "But just this once." He flexed his pinky, and a spring-loaded blade shot out from his wrist, slicing right through Maul's neck. The beast's head landed on the floor with a thump. His body slumped beside it. No, he didn't forgive him. He killed him. That was not cool, King Incarnadine. He is not a nice man, is he? Longclaw congratulated himself for making the right decision. "What is your command, sire?" The king flicked the sticky ape remains from his still singing blade and jammed it back into the scabbard on his forearm. "What else? We assemble for war." He threw his cape back, marching for the hallway. "Sound the alarm! Rally your horde! Bring all citizens to the eating hall at once! If it's blood that brat wants, then blood she shall have." Ravens poured from every faucet in the palace. The gushing seawater had carried them up through the plumbing and into kitchens and washrooms. Longclaw stormed down the main corridor, a spear in each paw. "Storm the houses! Don't let any of them escape!" Behind him marched the rest of his horde, armed with nets and catapults. Simon and his troops were fighting for their lives once more. I feel like that's all they've done. Those poor things. Remember, they went from the Just Deserts to the Sea Serpents, and now they're fighting everybody else. Whew. And that battle out in the Just Deserts had been going on days. Remember, that whole time Peter had been at the palace, they had been fighting. Feathers and fur scattered in all directions as the battle spilled into the main palace. From the stairwell, Longclaw bellowed orders to fire and reload the catapults. "Stay by the walls, grunts!" he roared. "Don't let them catch you in the open!" Ravens swooped and dove, pecking at the beast with desperate fury. But these apes were far stronger than the thieves of the desert. One swipe of their mighty claws could slice a bird clean in half. The water in the streets turned red with the blood of battle. Bodies from both sides lay strewn throughout the palace. The ravens were exhausted. They had been fighting for days at the nest. See, I just said that, didn't I? Then battling sea serpents, then swept up in a great flood, and now were warring against savage apes. The apes, on the other hand, were rested and well armed, having not only shields for close combat, but also clockwork weapons that could take the skies. Crossbows shot arrows clean through the birds' wings. Giant catapults launched nets around them. Simon and his troops were trapped between hurtling weapons and slashing claws. What had once been an army of thousands was now only hundreds strong, and they were losing brothers every minute. As you might imagine, monstrous sea creatures from the deep are far too large to fit through conventional plumbing. Thus, when the ocean broke through the wall, Peter, Frederick, and the 12 angry sea serpents were all swept straight into what used to be the Great Chasm, which had since transformed into a vast ocean. In these open waters, the sea serpents proved much better fighters. Suddenly, Peter and good old Frederick no longer enjoyed the advantage that the shallow moat had afforded them. The shrieking creatures whipped through the currents, creating enormous waves that sent Peter crashing against the palace walls. They snapped at Frederick, ripping hunks of flesh from his side and tail. To make matters worse, the king's warships joined the fight, firing cannonballs and harpoons into the foaming sea. "I'm no jellyfish, but this is getting pretty scaly, mate," Frederick hollered to Peter as he fought off a pair of gnashing serpents. "I know a couple of shellbacks around these waters. This sort of thing's right up their gully. Mind if I give 'em a shout?" "Huh, be my guest!" Peter shrieked, twisting free from a barbed fishnet. Good old Frederick dove deep into the ocean and loosed a mighty fish call. The entire sea trembled at the power of his voice. He returned a moment later. "That ought to even things up a bit. Now, if we can just keep alive till they get here." What did he say he was going to? Shellbacks. I wonder what those are. Peter and Frederick decided to change their tactic from head-on combat to swimming for dear life. At last, they heard a deep rumble from the depths below. "Oh, that's them now, mate." Frederick said. "We best keep to the shore." The ocean erupted as 6 giant sea turtles burst to the surface, sending water churning for miles in every direction. So shellbacks make sense, are sea turtles. That sounds like they're huge, right? Each was as big as an island and twice as old. Their craggy flippers were lined on both sides with black tusks. Definitely not like our sea turtles. Their shielded backs were covered in battle paint and primordial moss. The Baal loosed a mighty war cry and attacked without mercy. They swung their limbs, shattering the warships. They tore at the serpents with their beaks. "Careful you don't nip this little guy, mates." Frederick placed a protective fin over Peter. "He's on our side." The sea battle had a rather swift conclusion, which ended in the 12 sea serpents being reduced to a few dozen wiggling pieces, drifting down to the seafloor. "They'll be back someday," Frederick said. "They'll be back someday," Frederick said, watching the last flailing serpent tail disappear below the surface. "But no worries. It won't be in your lifetime." I think that was where I needed to stop because my time is getting long. All right, we're stopping right there. So at least we know Peter's alive. Don't know about Peg and the kids yet. Simon's not doing well. Don't know about Sir Toad. So we got a lot to find out next time. Next time I'll finish the book. All right?